Okay, so today we're going to be talking about conservative hypocrisy. I recently made a video about liberal hypocrisy, and now I'm evening the field a bit, and talking about the hypocrisy that I think comes from the conservative side of the aisle. And I believe there to be quite a bit of it, to be quite honest. Okay, so let's start with number one. Let's talk about religion. Okay, so conservatives often, it's almost as though it's part of the gig, talk about religion, their faith. It helps them get elected, it helps them stay in office, and many of them follow absolutely no guideline of their religious teachings that they preach. And quite honestly, I don't think there's any room for it in the political arena. I think your personal beliefs are only subject to public concern if you preach them publicly, which these people most often do, especially the Tea Party conservatives. Other than that, I think it should remain private, and I really don't have a problem with it. But when you preach your religion, when you preach these teachings, when you tell others that they need to do it, and that we need to govern a certain way to play up to these ideals, then you yourself don't follow them. I mean, there are so many examples you can go and look to of people who preached about these things, and then they were either cheating on their wives, or married 3 times, or secretly had a mistress having an abortion, and it just goes on, and it's absolutely ridiculous to me. It's so hypocritical. Number two, spending. Okay, so Barack Obama gets elected into office. He spends a great deal of money on his stimulus package, and everybody goes nuts. That, along with Obamacare, of course. But the problem I have with this is, at least it's targeted spending in the sense of legislative ideals that he had in mind when he came into office, and it was targeted in the sense that it had a purpose. Okay, so what's the problem with him spending that money after we just spent billions and billions and billions on wars and pharmaceutical reforms and education, things like that, which, the education reform largely failed. But I find it hypocritical when conservatives talk about the lack of funding for such spending programs such as Obamacare and other, cap and trade was another one, but that didn't pass. It bothers me because the wars were unfunded. The pharmaceutical plan was unfunded. There were so many things that were completely unfunded, and now those same people, to give an example, Paul Ryan, come out and are bitter and rail against the president for his unfunding or lack of funding for these projects and things like that. It's just absolute hypocrisy. Is absolute hypocrisy. You're only an accountant for, the United States when it's convenient for you. That's a problem. If you're going to do it for one president, you should do it for all presidents. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle he or she comes from. 3. Constitution. Okay. So again, it's a document of convenience. Everybody loves it when it plays into their hand, when they're trying to make an argument and citing the Constitution plays into their favor. It bothers me because the lack of separation of church and state coming from the Republican Party is absolutely mind-numbing to me. It bothers me that gay marriage is largely cited as improper practice to speak about politically. It only comes from religious influence. I mean, that's where it's derived. There's no question about it. If this weren't a Christian issue, it wouldn't be an issue at all. And then, of course, you have the whole, well, if you let them marry, then they'll be marrying goats and things like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the lack of respect for the separation of church and state coming from a party that always champions the Constitution, and we need to follow the Constitution, and it's always right, this, that, and the other thing. Meanwhile, you yourself do not follow it. You just don't. You don't respect that clause. You absolutely do not. And that's hypocritical. And fourth and lastly, the gridlock. John Boehner was elected into office in 2010 basically to stop Barack Obama. I understand that. But when he was reelected in 2012, as was Boehner being Speaker of the House, the United States made a decision that they wanted both Boehner and Obama in at the same time, rather than one in at one time and one in at another. So they decided that they want these two to work together. That's not what's happening. John Boehner doesn't have any ideas. He has nothing. He comes up with nothing that's really going to change anything. He just rails against what President Obama wants. And he knows that his constituency loves that. So that's why he does it. And that's not going to get us anywhere. There's no compromise. There's no nothing. And the fact that conservatives love this after hating Pelosi for doing it to Bush is, again, hypocritical. I just cannot understand it. I can't understand how you can applaud Boehner for basically shutting down our government, holding it hostage. It's not right, in my opinion, obviously. But I just think that a real compromise needs to be made, and Boehner really needs to step up to the plate and extend a hand as well as Obama does. But I just find the current situation of constant gridlock to be extremely hypocritical and very unfortunate for the future of our country.